I will say that I was on the faculty at UCLA for 30 years and retired 3 years ago to found the Centers for Research on Creativity here in Los Angeles, and we have a small London presence with Ann Bamford, and we've done 3 works internationally, and we're in the middle of 11 projects here. Okay, so we could do that. Our main project here has been in measurement of creative behavior, creative potential, creative motivation, and we were asked by the Disney company 3 years ago to work with 6 after-school creativity-focused programs and to develop a way of assessing these creative behaviors that may be developing within these programs. And so we did. We worked with the leaders and teachers of these programs to ask them what it was they were trying to do, how they were trying to do it, how they taught for creativity, what it was they looked at. And so the measure that I'm going to talk about in just a minute reflects a very collaborative effort, not only among the contemporary program people. We invited Mark to be an affiliate scholar with our center, and he was very helpful in attuning us to things that had been going on, developments in creativity assessment, and that was great. We still work with Mark. Okay, so next slide, please. I'm going to stress the importance of ordinary creativity or everyday creativity in this piece, because when we work with 4th graders in graphic design programs or musical theater programs, we're not working on the development of Martha Grahams or Einsteins or others in the big C category, not to say that some of these kids might not get to that point in their lives. We're interested in how creativity grows. How can we know that? I mentioned the lame conversation about creativity that we were reacting to 3 years ago. My response and our response to that is in a forthcoming book we call the Creativity Playbook, which has 30 briefings on sort of frequently asked questions about creativity. It's sort of that model. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. In the book, we have illustrations by an artist. They're all animals doing things that are related to what we're talking about. And this is a creativity debate on who's going to win it. So we're concerned with what is it? How can we measure it? How can we boost it? Do we want it? Is it the arts that matter? Do employers want more creatives on the payroll? In a sense, we have been discussing all of these questions so far today, and I'm sure we'll continue to discuss them. Next slide, please. We've talked about lack of definition, and we've talked about commonality of definition. It's a glass, half full or half empty. I think there is a commonality to definitions that goes straight to the idea that creative products or creative thought brings things that are new, so there's novelty, and value. Of course, that settles nothing, because what's valuable and what's new? These are judgments. In what context can things be thought of as valuable or new? Next slide, please. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, sort of a god in our world as a psychologist who brought us the book Flow and writes about creativity. Well, take a look at this. This is his quote. Some sort of mental activity and insight occurred inside the heads of some special people. If by creativity we mean an action that is new and valuable, then we cannot simply accept a person's own account. There's no way to know whether a thought is new except with reference to some standards, and there's no way to tell whether it's valuable until it passes social evaluation. That's a very restrictive definition of creativity. And so he's on my bad list now. Tell this to your preschool trustees, I say, or try pronouncing the name. I learned it with a musician who did a presentation at a conference, and he put it to music, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, on his piano. And by the 4th rendition, 400 people knew how to pronounce his name, which was more than previously did in the entire world. Okay, next. So I carry my domain peers with me. So if I need validation of what I say is new, I go right here, or what's valuable is valuable, and they're pretty handy. I lease them out for weeks at a time. Next, please. Next slide, please. Sorry. And just to sort of tie a little of the first part of the presentation together, we do have an obsession with extraordinary creativity. When Howard Gardner wrote his first book about creatives, it was about Martha Graham. It was about household worldwide names known to be creative. And Csikszentmihalyi does that as well. Jonah Lehrer brought us an interesting experience a couple of years ago that you may be familiar with. He wrote a book called Imagine How Creativity Works, and his previous books were very interesting, entertaining, bestsellers. And he spends the first perhaps quarter of this book talking about the invention of the Swiffer. And as if that's sort of what we mean by being creative, inventing household products that revolutionize sweeping floors and bring billions of dollars to Procter & Gamble. Well, he mentions this, and he talks about where it came from, and his story started in a kitchen 5 years before the product appeared, with someone who put something on a stick and started wiping floors with it, and it became the Swiffer after 5 years. Well, truth be told, the Swiffer was invented in China. And it had been invented 10 years before it ever appeared in the USA. And the story was apocryphal. So, yeah, it was a story about creativity, but it was a very creative story about creativity. He got into other trouble for whatever. I'm not going to deal with it. We can do it at lunchtime or something. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, ordinary creativity. Here's how we think of it. Here's how we think of creativity at the individual level to start with. When we think of kids in classrooms, in schools, in after-school programs. So what's new to you as an individual? What's new to you as a kid? We ask kids to think about uses for objects. That's a traditional fluency idea in creativity. Or to say, how would the world be different if? One of our items for that is, how would the world be different if all the animals on the planet could speak English and Spanish? And the kids go to town with that for 4 minutes. Anyone got an idea of how the world would be different if the animals could speak, all animals, English?
More vegetarians.
Pardon?
There would be more vegetarians.
There would be more vegetarians. The courts would be clogged with animal abuse lawsuits. I couldn't sneak out of the house. Dog would catch you. Okay. So what do we do as individuals? We think of possible problem solutions. The child in 4th grade is given a science problem to work on, let's say, at your seats, which is more common than we'd like to hear, might think of a new idea and contemplate it, roll it around in his mind or her mind, and okay, that's a new idea. That's new to the kid. That's something we're interested in. And it's valuable, or what is its value? Well, it might lead to a solution. That's valuable. Now, I'm not going to market it. I'm not going to sell it for billions of dollars, but it's valuable to me because solving that problem was valuable. Or if it doesn't lead to a solution, it can tell me not to look for the solution in that domain or in that area, and I'll move on. So that's a sort of new and valuable to the individual. And so using this new and valuable theme, which comes up just about any time a scholar or popular writer discusses creativity, the idea of new and valuable in one form or another become a part of the discourse. Next slide. On the idea of whether creativity can be taught, we've been watching programs now for 2 years, and we are keen on observing 3 things. If a classroom or an experience brings means to be creative, some materials, tools to work with, that sort of thing, and an opportunity to be creative, space, time, it's creative space I mentioned earlier, and motive. Now we're getting toward means, motive, and opportunity, which you could get convicted of creativity if you had all of those. Motive is not a problem with kids. Kids love to build things and try new ideas, sketch stuff, pile up materials. These are taken from Inner City Arts, a creativity lab. That's a set of tools, staplers, scissors, materials, construction paper, and the kids were building marble runs, like marble roller coasters. And the program brings enough basic knowledge of materials, basic knowledge of tools, to let the kids go and do what they want. It's sort of like the domain is that they're working in is construction of physical objects with paper and fasteners, and then the creative behavior and creative thinking goes on in the space that kids are given to work with it. And I do have to say that here and in some other respects, an awful lot of what we see in creative programs for kids involves collaboration. It just works well. We see that in lots of ways across different types of programs. Part of it is the educators' dispositions to organize kids in collaborative groups to do things, to invent things, as opposed to individuals sitting at their desks inventing things. There are other reasons for that, too. Next slide. Can creative abilities and motivation be measured? Yeah, I think it can be. How well and what's needed. One problem you face, I call the Tigger problem. If you ask Tigger if he can jump over the barn there, he will say, sure I can. And you ask him to go ahead and do it, and he'll say, oh, I don't want to. So motivation is a problem here. It's not a problem, but motivation's an issue. So having the capacity to do something, whether you can do it or not, is different from having the motivation to do it. And when you see a kid not do something, it's hard to tell whether he can't do it or whether he's not motivated to do it. So keeping an eyeball on motivation is an issue. We've heard some things about the Torrance test. I'm not going to describe it at all. And we have what we call our Next Generation Creativity Survey. CROC is Center for Research on Creativity, and let's go into what that is. Next slide. We began in 2012-13 with 12 different sites, different types of art and science programs. We did it with 1,400 students. It's been translated into Spanish. There was a project in Kenya that used the survey, and we did a project with elementary autistic kids at a school in Staten Island. We had the survey adapted by the educators there and us to do that. That was a terrific experiment, by the way. Those kids just soared by doing a performance of the Jungle Book. It's amazing. That's a separate report, but I'm not going to talk in detail about that study. Next slide, please. Okay, a little fuzzy, but that's okay. Here's what our survey or test is about. We started with the idea test and just got blown out of the water on that idea. Nobody wants another test. And I can't blame educators, parents, kids, or not. So we call it a survey or even a set of activities. And so we have, similar to parts of the Torrance test, on the right side here, we have self-report scales. We ask the kids to say, how easy is it for you to generate ideas? How novel, how original are your ideas? Those kinds of things. And we also, as a result of our discussions, built beyond Torrance in a couple of ways. One is we put a collaboration scale. How do you feel about collaborating? How important is it to you? And that sort of thing. We put in an empathy scale because empathy is showing up to me in discussions of social research time and again as a quality we really want to develop in kids. And in collaborative programs, empathy helps. Feeling for other people, feeling for your fellow kids, feeling for your teachers. Empathizing is an important quality of working in human groups. And then we've got the traditional self-report scales for creative behaviors. Then there's a side of the survey that requires human scoring. We decided we were going to put kids to creative tasks and actually look at them and develop rubrics and routines for scoring. And these include, for instance, on the animals that speak English and Spanish question or others like it, we look at how many ideas they generate. We use a rubric in a fairly simple rubric to rate them as original or not original or highly original. And we get them to comment on their programs, to invent a program like their programs. And we look at fluency with program content. We get them to draw pictures of themselves doing stuff in their programs and look at all of that behavior for indications of creativity. And then, next slide, please. To jump to one end of the thing, we have demonstrated associative thinking. That's a top chunk. We have self-perceptions about kids' own creativity. And then we've got these ideas about creativity. So we have 18 scales that we can report from this. And we do collapse them into an indicator of observed creativity, of self-reported creativity. And this is the main output from taking the test when we've had it scored, had human beings looked at it, looked at the scales, and so forth. And then we can boil it down to sort of 3 areas of growth and how much growth. And so far, the programs we're working with find this interesting and useful. Next slide, please. And some early lessons. This year, we're using a shorter survey. We've tried to preserve the scales. We've made them shorter, hoping they'll retain their validity. Here's one. We found that younger students coming into any of these programs, across all of our programs, show more creativity than older students coming into programs. So the 5th graders, 6th graders, and so forth showing up don't score as well on our creativity inventory as the young kids. And not only that, but the younger kids experience more creative growth, sort of defies the principles of regression to the mean. The youngest kids who show highest creativity at the start grow the most during this selection of programs. We're also, the second year, engaging in a systematic program of observing all of the programs we're working with. So when we see that certain outcomes are more likely or kids grow in certain ways, what is it about different programs that could help explain why kids are growing in some ways versus others? The biggest differentiation would be some kids grow in their own perceptions of their creativity, but not so much in their demonstrated creativity. That sounds pretty familiar in education, the world of educational assessment. And in some, kids grow in their demonstrations of creativity well more than they grow in their own self-perceptions of creativity. What's going on here? It may be a feedback process. It's not an artifact of some little statistical aberration, I don't think. If you get 1,200 kids, 1,400 kids, and this year we'll have a total of about 2,600. That's that piece. Okay, next slide, and here's where we are. Disney musicals, PS Arts, 2-year study. Disney Boys and Girls Club's Big Ideas programs in Connecticut, New York, Florida, and California. The New York Hall of Science, 3 programs. Oakland Playworks, which is a playground leadership program. It's very interesting. I won't get fully into it. I've got a minute to go. Inner City Arts Theater and Graphic Designs program, and we are just signing on with turnaround schools in Louisiana who are building their programs based on the A+ program in Louisiana. Okay, the last slide. I think it's the last one. Oh, nothing here. This is just the personnel. Mark and Ann in England, John Poggio at Kansas. Kim is our office person and assistant director, and check our website out to see details about all of these programs and where we're headed. Thanks very much.